In the year 1781, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant published the first of his esteemed critiques, the Critique of Pure Reason. Since then, the text has come to be regarded as one of the most important publications in the entire history of philosophy. In it, Kant rescues natural science from the skepticism of David Hume by reasoning that science is a description of the interaction of the minds of human beings with objects as they are independently of our experience of them. That is, our world arises from an entanglement between the structure of human cognition and things as they actually are. Hume questioned the foundations of science, for the evidence-based method of science cannot be used to justify itself, and therefore must be unscientific. That is, science can never justify with its own method that what it describes is a product of natural law rather than mere chance. Kant saved science from skepticism by redefining what science is supposed to be of. For Kant, science does not study the real world, but the world as it appears to the human mind. The skeptic can have no confidence that the properties and qualities we perceive are not merely applied by the mechanism of our experience, as is the case with things like colour or smell. Kant responds that this is precisely the point of science, that the uniformity of our psychic structure lends itself to the uniformity of the phenomena we experience, and thus the reliability of the empirical method in uncovering the structure of this uniformity. However, though we have intellectual access to the way in which we perceive the world, we are forever shielded from the transcendental thing in itself, the Noumenon, and thus it we simply cannot know. Kant saved us from one kind of skepticism, but he created for us another, and for the philosopher, this kind of skepticism is arguably much more troubling. As I have discussed previously on this channel, the underlying structure of philosophical thought necessitates a perspective which may be described as transcendentalist, and this perspective is grounded in the space beneath the subject-object relation, where ideas and objects dissolve into the infinite sea of potential. Contrasting the objectivist perspective, which sees a world built of concrete objects, and contrasting the subjectivist perspective, which sees a world built of abstract ideas, the abjectivist perspective posits reality to transcend both of these classes of entities, while nevertheless providing a ground for them. You can find a general overview of the abjectivist perspective in the video shown on screen now, but in this video we shall discuss a particular approach to this neutral and balanced perspective, one that inevitably arises from looking deeper and deeper within the mind. Depth psychology inherits Kant's transcendentalism, and this is made nowhere more clearly than in the psychoanalytic theory of Jacques Lacan. Lacan conjectured that the psyche, and indeed the world, can be described as a relation of three orders of being: the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. The imaginary forms the bridge between our internal and external worlds, relating to the inbound field of impressions or images that are absent of any kind of rational structure. The mind, which intellectualizes these impressions through language, translates the imaginary into the rational structure of human thought and understanding, the symbolic. But standing beyond the duality of the imaginary object and the symbolic subject is what Lacan calls the real, which is the underlying noumenon, or thing in itself, which forever resists categorization into the signs of language and meaning. The real is a fascinating yet obscure concept. It has been described as an impossible necessity, as that which is always lacking in language and thought, as the primordial abyss which swallows everything and dissolves all identities. It is, in a sense, a meaningless concept, for it contains no truth in regard to ordinary experience. Only that which can be described with language can be said to possess truth, for language signifies the introduction of meaning to the world, while the real is forever without it. Yet, our symbolic social reality of meaning depends on the meaningless real, for the real represents our inability to fully capture the world in our thought, and is therefore the something more that drives the development of human understanding. It is not an object of thought, but the limit of thought, which thought is continually seeking to overcome. Nevertheless, we do experience the real, as it pierces into our symbolical world in the form of horror, neurosis, and psychosis. It is the traumatic kernel at the core of subjectivity, the unattainable object of our deepest desire, and the dissatisfaction we feel with the failure of our desire. It serves as a foundation for our symbolic understanding, while never ceasing to threaten the stability of the same. I am sure that as I speak these words, many of you will recognize this idea. Many of you will have first-hand experience of the horror of the real, of the death of the ego and the emptiness beneath it. The real is the virtuality of reality, the simulation of being, the negation of all that is and all that is not. For Lacan, it is an inconceivable and inane void, something with which all words cease and categories fail, the object of anxiety par excellence. Julia Kristeva refers to the recognition of the uncanny and horrific as abjection. It is that which is rejected by and thus disturbs the order and familiarity of structured human experience. Just as the abjectivist perspective in paraphilosophy is that which denies both subjectivity and objectivity, abjection arises amidst a breakdown in the distinction between what is self, subjective, and what is other, objective. As we saw in the previous video, abjectivism is a rejection of reality, a rejection of the very notion that our experience and life is fundamentally real. We can now see how the recognition of abjectivism, which arises with the increase of human intelligence, is tied to a primal existential dread born of the resignation of a world beyond all human comprehension. This dread is not merely a fear of the unknown, but a profound unease that comes with the realization that the very structures of our thought, the categories with which we make sense of the world, ultimately fail in grasping the nature of existence itself. The abjective is Nietzsche's abyss, which stares back at us when we contemplate the limits of our knowledge. It is the nausea that arose in Sartre's confrontation with the absurdity of being. It is the dizziness of freedom that accompanied Kierkegaard's realization of the boundlessness of possibility. And so too for Lacan. The other is the object cause of desire. It is, on the one hand, the ultimate source of drive and passion, the reserve of psychic energy, while on the other, It is the basic object of anxiety, for it is always excluded by any attempt to comprehend and define, to apply order to our experience. Abjection is the root cause of all human anxiety, for the ultimate thing we all want is simultaneously that which we can never have, and that which causes us to want it. As Kierkegaard put it, the ultimate paradox of thought is the want to discover something that thought itself cannot think. But psychoanalysis was also developed in another direction, by one Carl Gustav Jung. Jung and Lacan naturally arrived at similar positions, although with different interpretations. For Jung, conscious experience provides the content for our personal unconscious, and the personal unconscious is ordered in accordance with universal archetypes belonging to our collective unconscious. In this way, the archetypes predispose us to certain kinds of experience, just as language patterns perception for Lacan, and the categories construct phenomena for Kant. Jung's personal and collective unconscious therefore sound very similar to Lacan's imaginary and symbolic orders respectively. Jung's equivalent to the real, and that which transcends the archetypal representations of the psyche, he called the psychoid, the archetype of the archetypes. Like the real, the psychoid exists beyond consciousness and beyond concepts. Both the physical structure of the brain and the psychological structure of the mind dissolve into the psychoid when we look deeply enough. It is neither mental nor material, but something neutral to them both. The psychoid archetype is the innermost core of the psyche, transcending and uniting mind and matter. It is abjective, for it is neither a subject nor an object, though subjectivity and objectivity are its two expressions. Jung went on to collaborate with the physicist and Nobel Prize winner Wolfgang Pauli, for Pauli believed that the dissolution of the conscious mind into the depths of the unconscious was paralleled by the dissolution of the physical object into the quantum mechanical field of potential. The particle, so as the conscious mind, reflects the known and manifest aspect of reality, while the wave, so as the unconscious, reflects the unknown and the unmanifest. Pauli further explains that this parallel between the material and the mental mirrors the distinction between the quantitative and the qualitative. In his own words, the only acceptable point of view appears to be the one that recognizes both sides of reality, the quantitative and qualitative, the physical and the psychical, as compatible with each other and can embrace them simultaneously. Naturally, then, the abjectivist perspective in paraphilosophy, which underlies the subject-object distinction, conveys this same unity of the quantitative and the qualitative. Abjectivism describes reality as being composed of abstract particulars and as being knowable through synthetic a priori reasoning. The typical examples of abstract particulars are numbers, which can indeed be interpreted in both quantitative and qualitative forms, as the measure and formal representation of nature, and as the conceptual principles we use to describe it, like unity, duality, stability, order. Furthermore, numerical and geometrical truths are synthetic a priori, which is the abjectivist route to knowledge. It is a testament to Jung's profound insight that he too came to the tentative conclusion that the nature of the psychoid world lies in the realm of number, which he recognized as the most primitive element of order in the human mind, indeed as an archetype of order which has become conscious. Like the Pythagoreans of ancient Greece, as well as modern mathematical Platonists like Max Tegmark, for Jung, number is what remains when we subtract the mental and physical properties from ideas and objects. They are that by which our world is structured, that which defines and conditions the archetypes of the collective unconscious, Lacan's symbolic order, and Kant's categories of the understanding. We can even represent the concept of number and mathematical sign with our dialectical matrix, where objectivity and subjectivity become positivity and negativity respectively. The abjective and subjective would then be neither and both respectively. The square root of a negative number, being neither positive nor negative, would be related to the abjective, which can be understood as a kind of emptiness. Incredibly, Lacan himself used this idea of the square roots of negative numbers to express the very same breakdown between symbols and that which is symbolized, the subject and the object that we discussed before. That is because imaginary numbers, as they are called, represent an ultimate lack of geometric representation. I cannot present to you I number of things. They can be visualized only as points on a plane, but yet in a dimension hidden to all common thought. Lacan specifically analogized our inability to symbolize the square root of -1 as the embodiment of the inherent lack in the structure of our desire for pleasure, which in turn fuels our very pursuit of pleasure. Jung, too, was fascinated by the idea of imaginary numbers. Early on in Jung's career, he had already developed a theory of the function of the psyche which is capable of transcending personal subjectivity to mediate an exchange with the deep unconscious. He named this function the transcendent function, precisely because it is also the name of a mathematical function which mediates the relationship between real and imaginary numbers, which he regarded as equivalent to the conscious and unconscious mind. It is this same transcendent function which is responsible for psychosis and schizophrenia in Jung's model, and this is, again, highly reminiscent of the abject or horrific encounter with the real in Lacanian psychoanalysis. The schizophrenic cannot tell the difference between their hallucinations and reality, between the abjective and the objective. It is a distortion of a function that otherwise serves as the vehicle of visionary genius, as Jung aptly demonstrates through his painstakingly documented active imaginations. There is no clear boundary to the deep unconscious. The subjective dissolves into the abjective without any clear end. The boundary is fuzzy, not sharp. You can be inside and outside at once. Just as Jung's transcendent function blurs the boundary of our conscious and unconscious mind to produce imagination and hallucination, the equivalent mathematical procedure unites the real and imaginary numbers to produce the complex numbers. As these numbers undergo iteration, which means simply that the values undergo the same process on repeat, do you know what is produced? Fractals. Fractals represent the entangled relation between observer and observed as each penetrates into the other. Fractals are an expression of the unity between the creation of the world perceived and the development of the mind that perceives it. And there is a rapidly growing body of evidence to suggest that various aspects of both neurological and psychological activity and the relation between them can be modelled by fractal geometry. So, I might not be completely off my rocker if I were to suggest that the abjective is not a transcendent noumenon existing beyond our world, but that it is rather the infinitely complex and ever-expanding frontier that exists between mind and matter. Our world is not the exploration of matter by the mind, it is the separation of matter and mind, which is an artifact of the exploration of emptiness by fullness. Indeed, Kant himself was careful not to make positive assertions about the transcendent. The noumenon is simply the limit of thought, not necessarily something that exists beyond it. And so it is with the abjective. It is the ultimate other, the absence of being. It is a realm of potential where nothing actually is, and it is through the exploration of this vast terrain of chaos that its own complement, superjective awareness, imparts order and ushers the no-thing into the something. In this process, that which is both positive and negative, the superjective, intermingles with that which is neither, the abjective, and thus the subject and object are born from the depths of mindless potential. The abjective is the borderland of being, the cutting edge of creation, the dynamic correspondence between thought and thing. And yet, at the same time, the abjective is the emptiness which drives evolution, the attraction towards what one is not. In Lacan's structuralism, it is a necessary impossibility. It is always present within the structure of human understanding, for we would have no experience at all if we did not will to experience that which we cannot. The inconceivable is the foundation of the conceivable. Ignorance is the foundation of knowledge. Anxiety is the foundation of peace.